You never know what you've got till it's gone, Alice murmured to herself as she packed the last of her meager belongings into the cardboard box. The room looked stark, the walls echoing with memories she had painted with love and care, now just a backdrop to her sorrow. She glanced around, her eyes lingering on the wedding portrait hanging crookedly on the wall. The corners of her mouth turned down. Her neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, poked her head in, a concerned look etched on her face. "You okay, dear?" she asked, her voice a gentle pattern of comfort. "As okay as I can be, I suppose," Alice replied, forcing a smile. It's all happening so fast. I know it's tough, but you're a strong woman. You'll get through this," Mrs. Jenkins said, patting her arm. The doorbell rang, interrupting the quiet. Alice took a deep breath and went to answer it. It was Mark, her husband's best friend. "Hey, Alice," he said, his voice thick with tension. "Is Jack around?" Alice's eyes narrowed. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice cold as ice. "Just need to talk to him, that's all," Mark said, shuffling his feet. "Well, he's not here," she said, her voice clipped. "He's moved on, you know. Found greener pastures without me." Mark looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting around the room. "Look, I know he's not the best, but he's going through some stuff. Maybe you guys can work it out." "Don't you dare," she began, but Mark held up a hand to stop her. "It's not like that," he said quickly. "He left something behind, something important." He handed her a small velvet pouch. "I think it's yours." Alice took the pouch, her heart racing. Inside was a ring, the same ring Jack had given her when they first got married. It was simple, a single diamond on a gold band, but it meant the world to her. She looked up at Mark, her eyes brimming with tears. "What's this for?" "He said you'd know," Mark mumbled, looking at the floor. "Just take care of yourself, okay?" As Mark left, Alice turned the ring over in her hand, feeling the weight of it. She didn't know what Jack's game was, but she knew she couldn't let him back in. Not after what he had done. She had worked too hard, been too strong, to let him waltz back into her life and pretend like nothing had changed. But as she stared at the ring, a part of her wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for them after all. The sun had set by the time Alice finished packing, the room now a shadowy tomb of a life she once knew. She took one last look around, her heart heavy with a mix of anger and sadness. "Goodbye," she whispered to the room, and with that, she closed the door behind her, ready to face the unknown. The ring remained a constant presence in her mind, a silent question mark that seemed to pulse with every beat of her heart. As she walked through the quiet streets, she found herself examining it under the flickering streetlights, the diamond casting tiny rainbows on the pavement. It was a stark reminder of the love she had once felt, now tarnished by betrayal. The next day, Alice decided to visit Mark. She had questions, and she needed answers. When she arrived at his apartment, she found him sitting on the couch, his eyes glued to the TV, his mind clearly elsewhere. "What do you know about this?" she asked, holding up the ring. Mark's gaze snapped to her hand, his face flushing a deep shade of red. He cleared his throat, his eyes darting around the room. It's just something Jack wanted me to give you," he stuttered, trying to play it cool. But Alice saw the hope in his eyes, the desperation in his voice. "Is this your idea of a joke?" she spat, her voice laced with accusation. "Or are you in on it too?" Mark took a step towards her, his eyes pleading. "No, Alice, it's nothing like that, I swear. I want what's best for you, and I think that's Jack." Alice felt a knot form in her stomach. The ring was a ploy, a trick played by Mark to win her back for his friend. The revelation was like a punch to the gut, but she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her at the sight of it. Despite everything, a part of her still loved Jack, still held on to the hope that he might change. But she knew that love could be blinding, and she wasn't going to let herself be fooled again. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "Because I care about you," he said finally, "and because I care about him. I know he's made mistakes, but he's lost without you. And I can't stand to see you hurt." Alice looked at Mark, really looked at him for the first time in years. She saw the kindness in his eyes, the friendship that had always been there. But now there was something more. Something that made her heart race in a way it hadn't since before Jack had left. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that she couldn't ignore the feelings that were bubbling to the surface. She took a step back, the ring feeling heavier than ever. "Thank you," she said, her voice shaky, "but I need some time to think." And with that, she turned and left, the weight of her decision hanging in the air like a storm cloud. As she stepped out into the night, the wind picked up, sending a shiver down her spine. She had a choice to make, and she knew it wasn't going to be an easy one. But she also knew that she couldn't let fear of the unknown keep her in a place of pain any longer. It was time to move on, to find happiness on her own terms, whether that was with Jack or without him. The ring remained a silent witness to the tumult of emotions raging within her, a symbol of the past, the present, and the uncertain future that lay ahead. The following days were a blur of confusion and introspection. Alice threw herself into her work, finding solace in the predictable routine. Yet every time she took a break, her thoughts would drift back to Mark's confession. His words echoed in her mind, a sweet melody that seemed to offer a glimpse of a life she never knew she wanted. The love she had felt for Jack was now a distant memory, a faded photograph of happier times. But the love that Mark offered was raw and untested, a fresh page in the book of her heart that she hadn't even realized was open for writing. One evening, after a particularly long day, Alice found herself at a crossroads. She could continue down the path of anger and bitterness, holding on to the shadows of what once was, or she could choose to walk towards the light, embracing the possibility of a new chapter. The ring in her pocket felt like a burden, a constant reminder of the love she had lost. With trembling hands, she took it out and stared at it, the diamond glinting in the moonlight. And in that moment, she knew what she had to do. Alice took a deep breath and dialed Mark's number. The phone rang once, twice, and just when she was about to hang up, he answered. "Hey," he said, his voice tentative. "Hey," she replied, her voice steady. "I need to talk to you." "Everything okay?" Mark asked, his concern palpable even through the phone. "No," she said, "but it will be. I just wanted to tell you, I can't ignore what you said. I need to figure this out." There was a pause on the line, and then, "Okay," he said, his voice a mix of relief and hope. "Whatever you need, I'm here." The wind rustled through the leaves as she stood there, the ring glinting in her hand. She knew that this conversation would change everything, that it would set her on a course that would either lead her back into the arms of a man she once knew or into the warm embrace of a love she had never dared to dream of. But she was ready. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Alice felt a spark of excitement, a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could find happiness again. And with that, she stepped into the future, ready to face whatever it had in store. The next day, Alice drove to Jack's office, the ring heavy in her pocket. She had practiced what she would say 100 times, but now that she was there, the words felt like a jumble in her mind. She took a deep breath and approached his desk, her heart pounding like a drum. "Jack," she said, her voice firm, "we need to talk." Jack looked up, his eyes widening in surprise. "Alice," he stammered, his voice thick with guilt. "What are you doing here?" With trembling hands, she placed the ring on the desk between them. "This doesn't belong to me anymore," she said, "but our daughter does." Jack's eyes searched hers and she saw the pain, the regret, the longing, but she also saw the coldness, the selfishness that had driven him away. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice cracking. "I'm saying we need to work together," she said, her voice unwavering. "For her sake, we can be good parents, even if we can't be good partners." The silence stretched out like a tightrope between them, each second a heartbeat that threatened to send her tumbling. But then Jack reached out and took the ring, his thumb brushing over the diamond. "Okay," he murmured. "We can do that." As she walked away from the office, the weight of the ring lifted from her heart. She had made her decision, and she knew it was the right one. It was time to put the past behind her and move forward. And as she drove home, she couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement, a sense that maybe, just maybe, she had found the strength to open her heart to something new. Over the following weeks, Alice and Mark grew closer. They talked, they laughed. They shared stories of their pain and their hopes. And in those moments, a bond began to form that was more than friendship, more than comfort. It was a bond of shared experiences, of understanding, of growth. They found solace in each other's arms, a solace that grew into something more profound. And as they leaned on each other, Alice began to see the man behind the best friend, the kindness and strength that had always been there. One night, as they sat on the couch watching a movie, Mark reached for her hand. "I know it's soon," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "but I can't help how I feel." Alice looked into his eyes, her heart racing. "What do you feel?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I love you, Alice," he said, the words hanging in the air like a promise. And as she looked at him, she knew that she felt the same way. The love that had once been tainted by Jack's betrayal had blossomed into something pure and untainted. "I love you too," she whispered. And in that moment, she knew she had found her new beginning. The story of Alice and Jack was now a tragic tale of what once was. But the story of Alice and Mark was just beginning. A tale of love born from the ashes of heartache. A love that was stronger for having been through the fire. And as they embraced, the ring that had once been a symbol of a love lost now felt like a promise of a love that was just getting started. But fate had one last twist to throw at Alice. One morning, as she was sipping her coffee, the doorbell rang. She looked at Mark, who had been reading the newspaper, his eyes reflecting the same curiosity and apprehension that filled her. They both knew who it could be, and yet neither of them wanted to acknowledge it. Alice took a deep breath and opened the door, her heart in her throat. Standing on the doorstep was Jack, looking thinner and paler than she had ever seen him, his eyes filled with regret. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "I know I don't deserve it, but I want another chance." The words hung in the air like a thick fog, choking her. She had moved on, found happiness in the arms of another, and here he was, asking for a do-over. She felt Mark tense beside her, his hand squeezing hers protectively. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tumult in her chest. Jack swallowed, looking at his feet. "I've been thinking a lot, and I realize that the only thing I've ever truly loved is you and our daughter. I want to be there for you both to make up for the time I lost." Alice felt the room spin as she stared at the man who had abandoned her. She had built a life without him, a life filled with hope and promise, and now he was back, threatening to topple the delicate house of cards she had so painstakingly constructed. She looked at Mark, whose gaze was a silent question, a plea for her to remember the love they had found together. Jack's apology had shaken her to the core. The anger she had felt for so long was now a confusing jumble of emotions. She had always hoped he would come to his senses, that he would realize what he had lost. But she had also hoped that she would be strong enough to move on without him. Now she wasn't so sure. As the days passed, Alice and Mark's relationship grew stronger, their bond unshakable. They talked about Jack, about the possibility of forgiveness, about the future. And with each conversation, Alice felt a part of her that had been frozen in time begin to thaw. But she knew that if she were to truly move forward, she had to face the past. She had to tell Mark the whole truth, to lay her fears and doubts bare before him. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, she took a deep breath. "Jack wants back in," she said, her voice barely audible. Mark looked at her, his eyes filled with understanding and a hint of fear. "What are you going to do?" Alice took a moment, the ring on her finger feeling like a hot coal. "I don't know," she said finally, "but I know that I can't do it without you." Mark squeezed her hand, his gaze never leaving hers. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you," he said, "but I hope you know that I'm here for you. I've always been here." And in that moment, as the light of the setting sun painted the sky with shades of pink and gold, Alice knew that she had two men who loved her, one who had hurt her deeply and one who had been her rock. But it was her choice, her future to navigate, and she knew that no matter what she chose, she would do it with her head held high and her heart open to the possibilities that lay ahead. Jack's sudden reappearance had thrown a wrench into their lives, but it had also made her realize that she wasn't as over him as she had thought. The love she had felt for him was like an old scar, faded but still tender to the touch. Yet the love she had discovered with Mark was a gentle warmth that had filled the void that Jack had left behind. It was a love that had grown from friendship, from shared pain and growth, and it was something she didn't want to lose. Alice took a deep breath and made her decision. Okay, she told Jack, we can try, for our daughter's sake, but it won't be easy. Jack looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. I know, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but I'll do anything. The three of them sat in an awkward silence, the air thick with tension. Mark's hand was still wrapped around hers, a silent reminder of the love and support she had found in him. Alice knew that this was going to be the hardest thing she had ever done, but she also knew that she couldn't live with the what-ifs. She had to give Jack a chance to prove himself, to show her that he had truly changed. Over the following months, Alice, Mark, and Jack embarked on a journey of forgiveness and redemption. It was a dance of emotions, with moments of sweetness that reminded Alice of what she had lost with Jack, and moments of passion with Mark that made her feel alive again. They took it one day at a time, carefully treading the line between the past and the present. But the path was fraught with challenges. Old wounds were reopened, new secrets were uncovered, and the weight of their shared history hung over them like a specter. Alice found herself torn between the comfort of the familiar and the excitement of the new. Every time Jack reached out to her, she felt a pull towards him, a ghostly echo of the love they had once shared. Yet every time she looked at Mark, she saw a future filled with promise, a life of happiness and security that didn't rely on the whims of a man who had abandoned her. The trio's dynamics grew increasingly complicated, with each person's feelings a delicate thread in the tapestry of their relationship. They had to learn to trust each other, to communicate openly, and to set boundaries that would allow them to move forward. It was a balancing act that required patience, understanding, and a willingness to forgive. And through it all, Alice remained steadfast. She knew that love didn't come with a guarantee, that hearts could break and people could change. But she also knew that sometimes you had to take a leap of faith to trust that the universe had a plan for you, even when you couldn't see it. And so she did, each day a little more, her heart opening up to the possibility of a love that could conquer all. The months stretched into a year, and slowly, Alice began to see a change in Jack. He was more attentive, more loving. He made an effort to be there for her, to support her, and to be the father their daughter needed. But the trust was hard to rebuild, a bridge that had been burned to ashes that now needed to be painstakingly constructed again. Mark, ever the steadfast companion, remained by her side through the highs and lows. His love was a beacon of light in the darkest of moments, a reminder that she was not alone. And as they grew closer, Alice found herself questioning whether she was making the right choice, whether she was holding on to a love that was no longer there, or if she was simply too scared to let go of the past. The ring on her finger was a constant reminder of the choice she had made, the promise she had made to give Jack another chance. But every time she looked into Mark's eyes, she felt the warmth of a love that had been born from the ashes of her shattered heart. In the end, it was not a grand declaration or a dramatic gesture that decided her fate. It was the quiet moments, the shared laughs, the gentle touches that made her realize where her heart truly belonged. And when she looked at Mark, she knew that she had found a love that was strong enough to withstand the storms of the past, a love that was ready to face the future, come what may. The ring, once a symbol of a love that had been lost, now felt like a burden on her finger. Alice knew she had to make a choice that would shape the rest of her life. She sat in her room, the walls a silent witness to her internal battle. The love she felt for Jack was like a familiar blanket, warm and comforting, but threadbare from overuse. The love she felt for Mark was like a fresh spring breeze, invigorating and filled with promise. A knock on the door brought her out of her thoughts. "Alice, can we talk?" It was Mark. She took a deep breath and opened the door, her heart racing. He looked at her with so much love and pain in his eyes that she couldn't bear it. "I know this isn't fair to you," she began, her voice trembling, "but I need to figure this out. I need to know if Jack has truly changed, if our love can be salvaged." Mark nodded, his jaw clenched. "I understand," he said, his voice strained. "But I can't keep watching you struggle with this. I can't keep loving you from the sidelines." Alice knew he was right. She couldn't keep stringing him along, couldn't keep him in a limbo of uncertainty. It was time to face her fears and make a decision that would affect all three of them. The conversation with Jack was harder than she had anticipated. He had made efforts. She had to admit that. But the doubt remained, a shadow that hovered over their every interaction. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I can't do this." Jack's eyes filled with tears and she felt a pang of regret. But she knew she couldn't live in the past, couldn't keep trying to fix something that was irrevocably broken. She had to let go, for her own sanity, for her daughter's well-being, and for the love that was still blossoming before her eyes. When she turned to Mark, she knew her heart was in his hands. She told him everything, laying bare her fears and her love for him. His embrace was like coming home, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. "I choose you," she whispered into his chest. "I choose us." Mark pulled back, his eyes searching hers. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice hopeful. Alice nodded, the weight of her decision settling over her like a warm blanket. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." And with that, she slipped the ring off her finger and placed it into his palm. "This is for you," she said, her voice filled with love. "For the future we're going to build together." Mark's smile was brighter than the sun, his eyes shining with happiness. He slid the ring onto his own finger, and in that moment, Alice knew she had made the right choice. They had a long road ahead, filled with challenges and uncertainties, but she was ready to face it with him by her side. The next chapter of their lives began with a kiss, a promise sealed between them as they stepped into a future filled with love and hope. And as they watched the sun set on the horizon, Alice knew that she had found her true north, the love that would guide her through the darkest of days.